Bona tarda a tothom. Gràcies al CCCB per convidar-me, per convidar el Nathan Thrall. Tinc el plaer i l'honor de presentar-los al periodista Nathan Thrall, flamant guanyador del Premi Pulitzer d'aquest any en no ficció per l'impressionant llibre Un dia a la vida de l'Abed Salama, anatomia d'una tragèdia a Jerusalem, que publica en català edicions del Periscopi i en castellà l'editorial Anagrama. Per cert que la Junta que concedeix aquests Premis Pulitzer, que són els més prestigiosos en el món del periodisme anglosaxó, ha atorgat aquest any una menció especial a la, diuen, la valent labor dels periodistes palestins que cobreixen la guerra a Gaza des del passat 7 d'octubre, així com les desenes de companys morts mentre informaven del conflicte. Nathan Thrall és nord-americà, jueu, i ara viu a Jerusalem amb la seva família i va passar alguns temps vivint a Gaza, una situació que podríem considerar extraordinària, alguns dirien valenta, donada la seva idiosincràsia nacional i religiosa. El Nathan ha treballat en mitjans tan prestigiosos com The Guardian, The Washington Post, The New York Times Magazine, The Economist, The Financial Times, Democracy Now!, CNN, BBC i molts altres mitjans que si els haguéssim d'enumerar tots ens perdríem part d'aquesta conversa perquè són molts. Ha estat professor al New York Bard College, una prestigiosa universitat d'humanitats a la vora de Nova York. Ha treballat durant més de 10 anys al programa per a l'Orient Mitjà i al Nord d'Àfrica de l'International Crisis Group i està considerat un dels analistes més contundents i lúcids d'entre tots els que tracten el conflicte entre Israel i Palestina. El seu anterior llibre, The Only Language They Understand, que el podríem traduir com L'únic idioma que entenen, descriu com l'única cosa que ha mogut a israelians i palestins cap a algun tipus d'acord ha estat l'ús de la força i la violència. Un dia a la vida d'Abed Salama, el llibre que ens ocupa avui. Aquest llibre no és un tractat geopolític sobre el conflicte entre israelians i palestins, ni una descripció costumista d'una societat tancada dins d'un mur, ni un estudi sobre les relacions humanes, ni una font de dades geoestratègica sobre l'ocupació. És tot això sàviament imbrincat, entrellaçat en el llibre, en Un dia a la vida d'Abed Salama, i que mostra com es viu i es mor a Palestina sota l'apartheid israelià. Així entenem com les males infraestructures porten als accidents i a la ràbia, la prepotència i la humiliació a la por, al tancament, la violència a la venjança, l'ocupació a la desesperació. I tot narrat en un llenguatge empàtic, minuciós, rigorós amb les dades, quirúrgic, en què les relacions socials, els noviatges, les bodes, les morts, la violència masclista, les famílies, els traïdors, expliquen les raons i sobretot les conseqüències del conflicte. Una obra de la qual el diari Financial Times va dir que tranquil·lament et trenca el cor i es llegeix com una novel·la. Explica'ns, Nathan, sisplau, de què va Un dia a la vida d'Abed Salama.
Thank you for that warm introduction, and thank you all for coming. I'm very pleased to be here. So before just describing the basic story of the book, I want to say a little bit about why I chose to tell the story of something commonplace, like a car accident, something that takes place all over the world. And the reason for that is that I wanted this book, in addition to being a piece of narrative and to tell a story and to put the reader into the shoes of the Palestinian and Jewish characters, I really wanted the book to have a systemic critique. I wanted it to describe this system of deep injustice that has existed for more than half a century. And if I had chosen a subject that was something headline-grabbing, like a war in Gaza, an invasion of Jenin, it's something that could be dismissed. It's something that could be written off as an exceptional case, bad commander, a bad set of orders, a case of excess. And what I really wanted to do was to show the ordinary lives of people in this system. And the way I thought to do that was to take something as commonplace as a car accident. And so the story takes place in the greater Jerusalem area, and Abed Salama is the father of a kindergartner named Milad, and they live in a walled enclave. There are about 130,000 people in this walled enclave today. It has a 26-foot tall gray concrete wall on 3 sides, often called the apartheid wall. A 4th side is a wall running through a segregated road, Route 4370, with Israeli traffic on one side, Palestinian traffic on the other. And there are just 2 exits from this walled enclave. One is a checkpoint into the rest of Jerusalem, and only about half of the residents of the enclave can exit through this checkpoint to go to schools and jobs in Jerusalem. And the other half don't have the right color ID in order to go through that checkpoint, and they go through an exit at the bottom of this enclave. And it's very easy, many of the enclaves in the West Bank are like this, it's very easy to close it down. It takes actually no more than 2-4 Israeli soldiers to have 130,000 people trapped inside. This is what happened in the immediate aftermath of October 7th. You had the checkpoint was simply closed. It takes no more than 2 soldiers to do that. And the exit at the bottom, a couple of roadblocks were put in it, and that's it. The whole thing is sealed. And so the residents of this enclave, they share the same city with me. I live in Jerusalem, but they live a radically different existence than mine. They have no sidewalks, no playgrounds. The roads are in disrepair. The single municipal school is in a former goat pen. The shortage of classrooms in East Jerusalem in general is so great that the educational system is forced to operate in shifts. So the parents who lived in this enclave faced a terrible choice. Those who had the ability to go to schools on the other side of the wall, the half that had the right color ID to be able to enter Jerusalem, they could choose to actually have their kids go through this checkpoint every morning, every afternoon, confront Israeli soldiers going to and from school, or they could send them, if they could afford it, to a private school within the enclave. And the story of this accident is a school bus trip at one of these private schools within the enclave. And Milad, the 5-year-old son of Abed, was very excited to go on this class trip. But because the students at this school come from families who both have the blue Jerusalem ID that allows them to go through the checkpoint, and also come from families with the green West Bank ID that prevents them from going through the checkpoint, they couldn't simply go to a nearby play area on the other side of the wall. They had to follow a very long and circuitous path along the wall through a checkpoint to the outskirts of Ramallah. And that's what they did that morning. They went along this winding path, they passed through a checkpoint, and a giant semi-trailer struck the bus. The bus flipped over and caught fire. This semi-trailer was on its way to a settlement quarry. It was extracting stones, natural resources from the West Bank, bringing them to a factory in the settlement industrial zone of Atarot in East Jerusalem. And those rocks are being used to pave roads inside Israel. And the area where this accident took place is what's known as Area C of the West Bank. So this is the more than 60% of the West Bank that's under not just full Israeli security control, but full Israeli administration. Any Palestinian in Area C needs to apply for Israeli permission to build a balcony or an outhouse or any kind of, certainly a home. And the road on which the accident took place is also fully administered by Israel. The Israeli police give out traffic tickets on this road, even though it's in the unannexed part of the West Bank. The Israeli police operate throughout Area C. And the road itself, though originally created for settlers as one of these so-called bypass roads, a road that was supposed to go around Palestinian communities and give settlers the sense that there was kind of Jewish contiguity from their workplaces in the center of Israel to their homes in the settlements, it later, the government later built a better bypass road for them, and this road was almost exclusively used by Palestinians at the time that the accident took place. And it was happening on the other side of the wall in an area of utter neglect. I mean, even inside the enclave where these parents and children live, emergency services would not go in without a police or army escort. These people, half of them were paying municipal taxes to Jerusalem and receiving almost no municipal services. They were forced to burn their trash in the street in the middle of the night. And the road on which this accident took place is similarly neglected. And the Palestinians who witnessed the accident take place pulled their cars to the side of the road and tried to help rescue these children. And it was more than 30 minutes before the first Israeli fire truck appeared, not because anybody was looking and trying and hoping that the children would die, but because there's a general policy of neglect toward these areas. And what I do in the book is I tell the story of Abed coming to the scene of this accident, and by the time he gets there, he finds that all of the children are gone, and there's a huge crowd of people. There's a burned out shell of a bus. And he asks people in the crowd, where are the children? And they say, well, they're at this East Jerusalem hospital, they're at another East Jerusalem hospital, they're at the military base a minute up the road, they're at the Ramallah hospital. And they were taken in different directions because they were just driven in the back seats of individuals, private cars that were at the scene of the accident. The drivers of those cars had different colored IDs, different ability to access the better hospitals in Jerusalem or not. And Abed himself has a green West Bank ID. He can't go through the checkpoints to enter Jerusalem. He can't go to the military base that's a minute up the road. And so he goes to the only place that he can go, which is the Ramallah hospital. And he tries over the next day, more than a day, to find out the fate of his son. He calls on relatives who live within the same enclave and have the blue Jerusalem ID to go check in the hospitals in Jerusalem to find his son. And the book is, called A Day in the Life of Abed Salama, but it's really also the life of Abed Salama and the life and family history of some of the other characters in the book. And the ambition of the book was not just to tell the story of this accident, not just to tell the system, to tell the story of the system that these people have to navigate, but also to tell the story of Israel-Palestine, and to do so through Abed's life story and family story, and also the stories of some of the other characters, like the founder of the settlement right next to where the accident occurred, some of the Jewish ultra-Orthodox emergency service personnel, some of the settlers who worked in the emergency services who came to the scene. And so I think actually I'd like to read a short passage from the book that gives a sense of the scene of the accident and the system that these people are navigating. The only thing that's important to know in listening to this passage is that there is a man named Salim who heroically rescued dozens of children from this bus. He and a teacher named Ula were the two people who went into this burning bus repeatedly they kept going into the flames and rescuing these children. And the other person whose name you should know is Huda, and she is a doctor who works for UNRWA, the UN Refugee Agency for Palestinians. And she was with her team. They operate a medical clinic, a mobile medical clinic. And they were on their way to a site visit to a Bedouin community not that far away when they saw the accident. And they pulled over to the side of the road, and Huda also was involved in helping to rescue the children. Nearly 20 minutes had passed since Huda and her staff had come upon the burning bus. Flames and smoke were still pouring from the smashed windows. Huda's driver, Abu Faraj, was directing traffic, keeping an open path for the evacuees, and telling drivers of oncoming cars to turn back. The crowd had grown so large that Huda could no longer see the driver and the teacher she and Salam had pulled from the front of the bus. She was focused on the children, gently carrying them with one of the UN nurses to the cars that had stopped at the accident site. Many of the drivers had volunteered to transport the burn victims and stood ready to race to the nearest accessible hospital, which, for most of them, was in Ramallah. The hospitals in Jerusalem were far better, but only those with blue IDs could reach them. A few of the drivers did have blue IDs, and some took off in the direction of Hadassah Hospital at Mount Scopus in Jerusalem. The majority, those with green IDs, went in the opposite direction, along the flooded road to Ramallah. Nearly all the children had been brought off the bus when Salam, who had by now gone in and out of the flames several times, saw that Ula, the teacher and his partner in the rescue, was trapped beneath a front seat and her leg was burning. But by the time he got to her, it was too late. She was gone. He carried Ula from the bus and placed her on the ground. Her nephew, Sadi, watched in the rain while a man covered her with his coat. In all of this, Salam had felt nothing, not even as someone in the crowd grabbed at his arm and pinched him. One of Huda's nurses yelled to him that his jacket was on fire. He shouted back that it was not. The nurse put it out as he went to climb back into the bus. The few children still inside were no longer alive. The last boy Salam pulled out was facing down, crouched behind the frame of a seat. He was still wearing a backpack, which Salam held to pick the boy up. Stepping out of the bus for the final time, Salam broke out weeping, shouting that he should have saved more. Somehow, not a hair on his head was burned. Abu Faraj stood unmoving, in shock, as if mesmerized by the flames. Huda turned to the nurse beside her and saw that her face was black and streaked by rain. She realized she must look the same. They were soaked and bone-weary, and there was nothing more for them to do. When a Palestinian ambulance finally arrived, most of the children had already been evacuated. Huda didn't even notice it. The bus was still crackling with flames, and there was much shouting and commotion. Not a single firefighter, police officer, or soldier had come. Huda wanted to follow the children. She found her team, and they returned to the UNRWA van. Nida, the pregnant pharmacist, was still inside, inconsolable. Abu Faraj started dropping off everyone at home as Huda called around and confirmed that most of the children were in Ramallah. Then she phoned her UNRWA supervisor. He didn't understand the magnitude of the accident and demanded that the team turn around and go to Khan al-Ahmar, where he would cut their pay. Huda refused and said he should cut just her salary, no one else's. After stopping for a quick shower, Huda set off for the hospital, taking the clinic's social worker with her. When they got there, word spread that Huda had been at the crash. A great many parents and other relatives sought her out, asking whether she had seen a boy with a Spider-Man backpack, a girl with her hair in yellow ribbons. Huda told them all the same thing. The children had been covered in soot, and she couldn't tell what they were wearing. Going from room to room, Huda checked on the injured children, soothing them. Since leaving the bus, she had felt something nagging at her. She was sure the kindergartners had been silent, at least early in their ordeal. Now, at the bed of one girl, Huda asked her why that was, why she had heard no sound. We were so scared, the girl said. When we saw the flames, we thought we had died. We thought we were in hell.
Tu vas triar un cas que es podria considerar ordinari, com és un accident d'autocar, per mostrar els estralls de l'ocupació. Del teu llibre es dedueix que aquest sistema de segregació, de subjugació, d'apartheid en el que viuen els palestins està premeditat i elaborat a consciència per les autoritats israelianes i que ni els acords d'Oslo tenien voluntat ni d'eliminar-lo ni tan sols d'alleugerir-lo.
You know, one of the things in this book is watching how Abed's life was transformed by Oslo. And at the time that it happened, he was among those who was against it. He actually foresaw that it was going to make his life worse, that it was going to lead to increased segregation, that it was going to lead to an increase in the permit system and the restrictions that he faced to travel and to work. And, you know, the thing about this system, and one of the reasons that I chose to describe it in a book like this through a dramatic incident, is that it's very complex. You could write an entire book on just the means of land confiscation. You can write a whole book just on the permit system, on the checkpoints. And it can be very dry to delve into that system. And my goal really was to try to have it become clear by watching a person just working their way through it, like Abed. But you mentioned the word apartheid, which is one that has now been used quite frequently in the last several years. It has been used by the leading human rights organizations in the world, which have devoted very, very long reports to the practice of apartheid by Israel against the Palestinians. Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, the UN Human Rights Council. These are all very detailed legal reports that are trying to find whether or not Israel is practicing apartheid as defined in the 1973 Convention Against Apartheid and in the Rome Statute, which established the International Criminal Court. And the definition of apartheid in both of those is a system of domination by one group over another with the intent of maintaining that system. And all of these leading human rights organizations, international legal organizations, leading Israeli civil society organizations, leading Palestinian human rights organizations, even Israel's former Attorney General, the highest legal authority in the State of Israel, have all found that Israel is practicing apartheid according to the definition in the Rome Statute. And that is definitely one of the subjects of this book. In terms of the actual route of the wall and how it encircled the people who live in this community, one of the characters in the book is the architect of the wall, a colonel in the IDF named Danny Tirza, who describes how he chose to route the wall in the way he did. And Israel had a very clear demographic objective when it established the wall and when it chose the route of the wall. And that demographic objective was something that has existed for decades in Israeli policy, which is maximum land, minimum Arabs. And so what they chose to do was to take the most densely populated areas of Jerusalem, the number one priority area for Israeli settlement, and to put the wall around those areas, effectively cutting off a huge portion of the city's Palestinian residents from the rest of the city. And they have created a radically different life for a huge number of Palestinians in Jerusalem, we're talking about more than a third of the population of Jerusalem that now lives in these enclaves on the other side of the wall.
Precisament amb els acords d'Oslo van créixer més que mai els assentaments. Semblava que els acords d'Oslo havien de servir per aturar-los, però les dades demostren que va ser el contrari. I ara, des de l'octubre, s'ha disparat l'ocupació. Crec que s'han desallotjat 18 poblacions palestines a Cisjordània, s'han erigit 14 nous outposts, que són uns inicis d'assentament, amb colons radicals. Creus que és naïf pensar que una cosa són aquests colons desbocats i l'extrema dreta que ara governa Israel, i l'altre Israel, el de centreesquerra, si existeix encara, democràtic, que creuen els dos estats, i podríem considerar que símbols de l'oposició a l'apartheid israelià com l'ONG Peace Now, el partit d'esquerres Meretz o el diari crític Haaretz s'ho miren des de la barrera i de pas li serveixen al sistema per demostrar que són democràtics?
A couple of years ago, I wrote an article in the London Review of Books called The Separate Regimes Delusion, which was in part a critique of the Israeli center-left, and in particular the groups like Peace Now that you mention, or people affiliated with the Meretz Party, the left of the center-left in Israel, who have created a kind of conception, which is that, so if you look just rationally at the situation in Israel-Palestine, what does it actually look like? So there's Israeli sovereignty, a single sovereign from the Jordan River to the Mediterranean Sea, with 7 million Palestinians and 7 million Jews living under Israeli control. And the vast majority of those Palestinians do not have basic civil rights. There is limited autonomy for Palestinians in pockets of the West Bank, little islands of autonomy. That is very limited. Israel enters these areas of so-called autonomy all the time, makes arrests. And those pockets of autonomy together, these 165 islands of limited autonomy, together with Gaza, make up only 10% of the territory under Israel's control. And it's all discontiguous, and the Israeli area is, of course, contiguous. So that system, with over a half century of people living without basic civil rights, millions of people living without basic civil rights on the basis of their inborn characteristics, cannot be described as a democracy under any definition of democracy that I know. So how does the whole world say that Israel is a democracy, and how does the Israeli center-left say that Israel is a democracy? Well, the only way to do it is to create a mental construct which says that Israel is a democracy within its pre-1967 borders, up to the so-called Green Line, and the area that's under Israel's control outside of the Green Line is a mere temporary situation, even though it's lasted for more than half a century, and even though it's lasted for the majority of the state of Israel's existence. So this is a temporary situation, and it's actually not really part of the state of Israel. It's part of a separate regime. And so then there are some kind of legalistic arguments about why this constitutes a separate regime. It's under military occupation. It's true that Israeli laws are applied to the Jewish population in this area, whereas military laws are applied to the Palestinians in this area. But the argument goes that it's still a very important distinction that the military commander needs technically to import those laws for the Jewish population. He's literally cutting and pasting them and putting it as a military order that says that the Jewish population gets to enjoy these same laws and live like Israeli Jews do in the rest of Israel. Again, the notion is, it's just a military occupation, it's under the army's control, it's not the state of Israel, it's a separate thing, as though we're talking about the United States versus the U.S. Army in Iraq. But in fact, every single Israeli government ministry is operating in the occupied territories. When you go from Israel to a settlement, you are traveling on roads that were paved by the Transportation Ministry, that are funded by the Transportation Ministry. You enter these settlements and they have Israeli HMO, they have Israeli health clinics, they have Israeli government schools, there are courthouses, there are Israeli fire trucks, Israeli police stations, Israeli street signs. You are in a suburb of Israel, and it feels in every way like a suburb. And these areas have all been annexed de facto. And so the critique of my piece was to say that these things have been absorbed by Israel, these settlements, and that the Israeli government itself, its legislative branch, its judicial branch, its executive branch, all of them are actually implementing the regime of control in the occupied territories. So you cannot say that there is a separate and separable regime running the occupied territories, and therefore Israel cannot be called a democracy.
Hi ha un moment molt dur en el llibre en què descrius un reportatge de la televisió israeliana que es titula, un reportatge crític, que es titula «S'ha mort un nen àrab, ja, ja, ja», on entrevisten gent que celebra i aplaudeix l'accident d'autocar, la mort dels 4 infants. Hannah Arendt deia que la mort de l'empatia humana és un dels primers i més reveladors signes d'una cultura a punt de caure en la barbàrie. Israel corre el perill d'entrar en aquest túnel del terror o creus que ja hi és?
I think there's no question that we're already there. If you just look at the statements of mainstream politicians, you listen to the South African case presented at the International Court of Justice, where they were describing the incitement to genocide. There was no shortage of quotes from leading Israeli figures, and not just from the far right, who were clearly inciting to genocide and talking about nuking Gaza and flattening Gaza and eradicating Gaza. So I think that the piece of the story that you described, where these young people were celebrating the deaths of the children in this bus accident, that obviously not all of Israeli society is like that. And this is a subgroup within Israeli society. And there are many Israelis who are horrified to learn that there were young Israelis who were celebrating the deaths of these children. But it's a phenomenon that has grown since the time of this accident, and it has entered the mainstream.
En el llibre també descrius molt bé les relacions interpersonals entre els palestins. Fruit d'una minuciosa investigació, crec que vas fer llarguíssimes entrevistes, i el lector acaba empatitzant molt amb els personatges dels quals n'acabes descrivint fins i tot moments íntims, com el de l'Abed i la seva núvia impossible, la Kassel, quan intenten parlar per telèfon d'amagat. Et va costar guanyar-te la confiança d'aquesta gent, perquè tu ets jueu, nord-americà, vius a la part oest de Jerusalem, perquè aconseguir que et confessessin fins i tot algunes intimitats i permetre't explicar-les en el llibre, vol dir que vas assolir un alt grau d'afecte, de proximitat amb ells.
Yeah. So I wish Abed were here to answer the question himself. He and I were on book tour for a little while together when the book first came out. It was published on October 3rd in the US and the UK, and then 4 days later was October 7th, and he had to go back to be with his family shortly after that. But he was asked a number of times this exact question, which was, why did you trust this guy? And the answer that he typically gave was that when I came and I saw him, he said that I had tears in my eyes when he told me the story. But the truth is, I think that Abed was somebody who yearned to talk about his son and to talk about the accident, and he was surrounded by people who didn't want to upset him and never brought it up. And he felt like he was living in a cloud of silence, and when I approached him, it was very welcome for him to be able to talk at length about his son, and we spent a lot of time together talking about him. And when he would cry when we spoke, he referred to me with his friends and family. He'd jokingly call me the man who makes him cry. And I sometimes would apologize to him and say, I'm sorry for putting you through this. And he would say, don't apologize. And I believe what he said after that. He would say, I enjoy talking about him because I feel closer to him just by hearing his name, by saying his name. So I think that a big part of it was that actually the parents whom I spoke to and other characters whom I spoke to were yearning to talk about it. I should say also that there was a very tough decision for me to make as a journalist because Abed revealed so much. I thought at a certain point when I finished the manuscript that I should share it with him, even though this is not almost ever done. For very good reason, a journalist does not show a piece or a book with the subject of it, because you don't want to wind up litigating every single sentence and have this person want to change how they're described to appear more favorably. And I was really tortured by it because he had really shared so much and invested so much trust in me. And in the end, I decided not to share the book with him until it was too late to change it, until I had actually received the hardcover. And I was quite tortured by this, and my wife kept telling me, you should just share it with him. It's not worth how much you're agonizing over this. But in the end, I didn't give it to him until I had the hardcover. The day I got the package from DHL, I called him, I went and I met him, and I gave him the book. And maybe a day later, maybe 2 days later, he called me and he said, I've finished the first part of the book. And the first part of the book is all about his love lives, really. And he said, I'm going to be in a lot of trouble. And I knew that you were going to put in many details, but I didn't know it would be this many details. And he said, I'm just, you have no idea, what's coming to me. They're close relatives who I'm, never confronted in real life, that I'm telling how they betrayed me in the book. There are, the now husband of my first love, who's, portrayed in a very unflattering light, and I reveal things that she thought about him before they became married, and he said, I don't know what to say. I'm quite, upset about what's going to happen. And so I said to him, just please, this is the worst reaction I could imagine. Please, read the rest of the book and call me. And so then I, lost sleep for the next 3 nights. And then he called me and he said, I finished the book and I understand what it is that you were doing, why it was important to share these details and to give a full picture, and I'm ready to stand in front of whoever comes at me. Everything is true, and it's my story. I have the right to tell it.
Una mostra de la gran sensibilitat del Nathan Thrall és i del coneixement de la cultura palestina és la descripció de com hauria pogut ser un enterrament digne pel Milad i un comiat per part del seu pare. I ara em permeto jo llegir un petit paràgraf. Diu així: si aquella hagués estat una mort normal, hauríem dut en Milad a casa per ser rentat i purificat a mans dels homes de la família. Tot seguit li haurien col·locat la mà esquerra a la panxa i l'Abed i els seus germans l'haurien bressat fins a deixar el cos net d'impureses. Llavors l'haurien banyat 3 vegades, o 5, o qualsevol nombre sanà, i a continuació l'Abed i els seus germans s'haurien encarregat de practicar el vudu a les mans i als peus d'en Milad. Li haurien ficat cotó a tots els orificis corporals i l'haurien perfumat amb càmfora, empolvorat el cos amb henna i cobert amb una mortalla blanca. Tot això, però, era impossible. No va poder fer l'enterrament que ell volia en Milad i això el va colpir.
It was very difficult for him that he was unable to bury his son as you normally would, but he was too badly burned for that to be possible. And in general, he felt that he wasn't really able to grieve, that he never was given the space to grieve, that from the moment of learning that Milad passed away to the funeral, he was surrounded by people, he was pulled in different directions, and he never felt like he had the time to actually be alone, which he needed.
En el llibre parles del que en podríem dir un ras i curt neteja ètnica per part d'Israel amb els palestins. Com es porta a terme aquesta neteja ètnica?
Are you talking about the description of Haifa in the beginning, in the Houthi section?
Anar eliminant permisos de residència, expulsant palestins, fent que la població palestina decreixi.
Yeah, I mean, obviously the State of Israel was founded in a giant act of ethnic cleansing that is at the center of the story of Huda, the doctor who works for UNRWA, her family story, and of their leaving Haifa and never being able to return. But the dispossession, the forced displacement, the small-scale ethnic cleansing is happening today in the West Bank. On a much bigger scale, you have over 1 million Palestinians in Gaza were forced from the north to the south. In late September, the United Nations put forward a little mini report or statement about how much forced displacement was happening in Area C of the West Bank. This is where all the settlements are, all the settler roads, all the military bases, all the Israeli infrastructure. And so this is the area where Palestinians are most vulnerable and where Palestinians are also facing the most pressure to expulsion, who are facing expulsion. And the United Nations said that the levels had reached new heights, and that over 1,100 Palestinians in Area C had been forcibly displaced in the preceding 18 months. And then after October 7th, while all eyes were on Gaza, the expulsions were ratcheted up, and you had an even greater number just in the 6 weeks after October 7th who were ethnically cleansed from their communities in Area C in order to make way for adjacent settlements, Jewish settlements.
Què li sembla el posicionament d'Espanya i altres països europeus, Espanya ha anat de la mà d'Irlanda i de Noruega a l'hora de reconèixer l'estat palestí, en les fronteres del 1967? Creu plausible la idea de dos estats o la d'un sol estat convivint les dues comunitats juntes, els dos pobles, o la d'expulsar els palestins cap als estats àrabs del voltant, o una quarta opció que seria la de continuar com ara, que és la d'Israel annexionant cada vegada més territori palestí. Alguna d'aquestes quatre és plausible, és possible? O n'hi ha una altra?
So, I am in general pretty averse to talking about solutions because I feel that entire conversation is not only detached from present-day realities, but distracts from them. And it has reached a point where the abstract idea of some hypothetical solution has been reified to such a degree that it's almost like the international community cares more about the hypothetical than they care about the situation on the ground. You'll have, statements from European EU member states saying, this violation of international law is unproductive or, lamentable because it damages the two-state solution. Well, actually, it's lamentable because it's damaging the lives of the people affected. And I've just faced real frustration with how much there has been debate about these hypotheticals, one state versus two state. Neither of those things are anywhere on the horizon. They are eons away. You would need a revolution for those things to be on the table. What's on the table is something much worse, like forcible transfer, or perpetuation of the status quo. And there is a kind of default assumption among many Western diplomats, especially American ones, that Israel is going to have to choose. Israel has to choose. Eventually, it's going to have to either give the Palestinians a state on 22% of the Palestinian homeland, as the PLO is demanding, or they're going to have to give them citizenship and equal rights, one or the other. And it's obvious that Israel is going to have to choose. And this is very much in the language of secretaries of state like John Kerry and others. And the truth is that Israel has never had to choose, and it does not now have to choose. If you are presenting Israel with the choice between giving Palestinian citizenship and equality and Israel ceasing to be a Jewish majority state, which 99% of Israelis do not want, very strongly do not want, or giving them a state on 22% of their homeland with the evacuation of hundreds of thousands of settlers and major intra-Jewish turmoil inside of Israel, and a perception that this would be a security risk. And then there's a third option, which is ignore the finger wagging of the international community and continue as you are and expand settlements and say Israel is a democracy and the occupation is temporary, and yes, there needs to be a peace process and we should resolve this, and it's so lamentable that this occupation has gone on for so long, but what can you do? The Palestinians are rejectionists. And that third option is by far the least costly thing. And that is what Israel will continue to choose for the foreseeable future, unless the world changes in a major way and the incentive structure for Israel changes.
Es diu que Israel podria entregar, cometes d'entregar, el control de Gaza a l'autoritat palestina o a una coalició internacional. Però vostè creu, tu creus, Ethan, que Israel, la comunitat internacional i els Estats Units saben que és imprescindible un acord amb Hamas?
I think there's just a lot of wishful thinking all around about the plans for Gaza and the future for Gaza. I think it will be extraordinarily difficult to find any Arab states who would be willing to police Gaza and basically be a proxy force for Israel inside of Gaza. And of course, the Palestinian Authority has very, very low legitimacy, and you know, if you look at public opinion polls, even in Gaza, many Palestinians don't want the Palestinian Authority to come back. And so what is left is obviously Hamas is the strongest power on the ground. And we see that Hamas isn't going anywhere. We see that when Israel, you know, declares an area to have been, you know, cleansed of Hamas, and that they have declared victory in this area and mission accomplished, immediately when they leave, who is going and distributing what little aid is coming into Gaza? It's Hamas. And we see also in these same areas where Israel has declared victory that Israeli soldiers are dying in these same areas. So they are not eradicating Hamas, and Hamas will continue to be the strongest power on the ground in Gaza. Obviously, they are now negotiating with Hamas for that reason, and for the reason that they're holding the hostages. So I agree with the premise of your question that Hamas is not going anywhere.
Potser ara hauríem d'obrir un torn de preguntes aquí entre el públic. Tenim mitja hora, per tant, allà baix.
Hola, moltes gràcies. En primer lloc, agrair aquesta exposició, m'ha semblat molt interessant. M'ha semblat molt interessant el que deia el Nathan en relació al sistema d'incentius. Si es vol canviar i forçar Israel que no esculli l'opció menys costosa, que és el que estan fent ara, de continuar amb l'status quo, s'hauria de canviar els incentius. En la teva opinió, Nathan, qui té el poder per forçar aquest canvi d'incentius? És el govern dels Estats Units? Són les altres democràcies occidentals, països àrabs, la societat civil israeliana, la gent que estem aquí en aquesta conferència? Qui pot fer alguna cosa per poder canviar aquest sistema d'incentius i que potser en un futur les coses millorin? Gràcies.
Thank you for that question. So all of those actors that you mentioned are able in different ways to try and change the incentives for Israel. But realistically speaking, we are very, very far from anyone actually doing that. So, Israel prioritizes trade with the EU. It's its #1 trading partner. And the EU association agreement is very precious to Israel, and that's a tremendous piece of leverage that the EU has. But we are nowhere near the EU calling into question the association agreement, and even the request to have the Commission look into whether Israel is complying with the articles of the association agreement have been ignored. So and similarly with the United States, the United States has tremendous leverage over Israel. Every Israeli general will tell you that our national security depends on the alliance with the United States. It's not just about the money, it's not just about the arms, it's not just about the defense of Israel and the UN Security Council and international institutions. Our whole national security depends on this alliance with the United States. And so the United States has tremendous leverage, but how close are we to the U.S. actually exercising that leverage? Pretty far. And just to give an example, look where we are today. We have a massive shift in public opinion, which I think is very important. And we have huge mobilization for Palestinian human rights. And where are we in terms of policy in Europe, for example? So the lowest hanging fruit would be to ban settlement products from Europe. That would be, I would think, fairly easy if you're thinking about European public opinion. But it's nowhere on the table. So we would need to see things like that to start to happen before we could imagine the incentives changing for Israel. And it's a very, very long road. I do think that we are moving in that direction, but it's slow and incremental.
Hello, good evening. Nathan, I'll ask the question in English. Thank you very much for your explanations. Just a very short question regarding the book. Has it been translated into Hebrew and Arabic? And I would like to know, which I suppose, how it's been accepted in both communities in Israel and Palestine. Thank you.
Thank you. So there is an Arabic translation in the works. It hasn't come out yet. And I could not, the two places where I really wanted a translation that I faced a great deal of difficulty, will not surprise you, were Israel for a Hebrew translation and Germany. And in Germany, I finally found a small press that agreed to publish it after all of the major German publishers rejected it with very nice notes full of praise for the book and saying we couldn't touch this politically. And in Israel, again, I couldn't find any of the publishers that were willing to take it on, but I was just approached by a prominent translator who loved the book, an Israeli who loved the book, and felt that it was very important for Israelis to read it in Hebrew. And so he's taking it on himself to just translate it now on his own. He's volunteered to do it for free because he loved the book. I was very moved by that. And so I hope there will be a Hebrew publication soon.
Thank you for this conversation, which was both lucid and heartbreaking. I was wondering, you work with pain and grief and sorrow in this book. How do you do that? How do you get this literary distance to write about these things? And does you taking narrative distance then change your real life perspective on this pain? Your maybe not real life perspective, but your non-writing, life. Does your political view of the thing changes? Thank you.
Thank you for that. So there's obviously a big difference between my emotions reporting and writing the book and how I try and have the sentences come across on the page. And when I was reporting the book, it was a very emotional process for me, and writing it as well. I would go and speak to somebody and then come back home and tell my wife what I had heard, and she would be crying and I would be crying, and it was like that for months. But when I write, I really I wanted the book to be understated and, as you say, to have a neutral feel to it, because I feel that the truth of the story is damning enough on its own, and I would only weaken it by adding some kind of emotional embellishment of my own.
Just a personal question to yourself, sir. Do you have any fears for your own safety, or have you had any threats to your own safety?
I've been getting this question a lot lately. I don't know why, but just in the last week or so, I've gotten this question a lot. No, I don't. I don't feel any threat to my safety. And part of that is because the Hebrew version of the book hasn't come out. No, really, I mean, there's a big difference when you're writing in Hebrew. And so an Israeli journalist not long after October 7th, Israel Fry, wrote something just expressing grief for the dead in Gaza. And he had a mob outside his home. He's an ultra-Orthodox journalist, a left-wing ultra-Orthodox journalist. And so he had a real threat to his safety. And I think that, again, when the book comes out in Hebrew, maybe then it'll be a bit of a different story. But right now, I'm pretty immune.
Hi. I was fascinated by the Camp David peace process, and as under my impression, it was the last days of the Clinton administration, and on the Israeli side there was Barak, and on the Palestinian side there was Arafat, and the Israelis made a very ambitious proposal whereby they would return a large percentage of the occupied territories, and East Jerusalem would be a capital. And the Palestinian advisors were supportive of it, but at the last minute, Arafat turned the deal down, and then the second Intifada broke out, and it seems that in Israeli society, there was a change from being very much in favor of peace and a peaceful solution to a disillusionment with peace in the years after that, 2000, and I was wondering what your take on that would be.
Thank you for that. So, there is a lot of writing about Camp David, what really happened at Camp David. There are rival accounts of the offer, but what is definitely the case is that the offer that the Israelis put forward at Camp David initially was, I can't remember the percentage, but it was well below 90%. I think even closer to 80 in the initial part, and then they went up to 92. And again, the real issue, in my view, is a difference in perception between the two sides, which is the Israeli negotiators think that the conflict is about the occupation of the West Bank and Gaza that began in 1967. That's what we're here to resolve. That's the conflict. There is no questioning the legitimacy of the state of Israel within 78% of historic Palestine. The whole world has recognized Israel. That's not up for negotiation. And it's true that that state was created through ethnic cleansing, and that in fact there had to be laws put in place to lock in the gains of that ethnic cleansing to prevent Palestinian refugees, but not Jewish refugees of that war, from coming back. But that is not only crazy people will bring that up or want to talk about that or negotiate over it. And the real issue is resolving the occupation. For the Palestinians, of course, the main issue is, in fact, the creation of the State of Israel in a land that was majority Palestinian against the will of that native majority. And the fact that there was necessarily ethnic cleansing in order to create a Jewish majority state. And so when the Palestinian national movement, through a lot of arm twisting, eventually came to accept. Initially, they wanted a single democratic state across historic Palestine. But through a lot of arm twisting, they finally accepted having a state in two pieces of territory, two cantons, essentially, of Gaza and the West Bank. And that they would accept to have a Palestinian state, even though there are half of the people under Israeli control, there are half of the people inside historic Palestine, and that's ignoring the millions of Palestinian refugees who are outside and want to come in and cannot, that they're just going to accept 22% of the territory. And that has been the PLO position for decades now. And when the PLO comes to the negotiation, they say, look, we made the historic concession. We gave up 78% of our homeland. This is the greatest steal that anybody could ever imagine. And the Israelis come and they say, well, that 78% isn't even up for negotiation. So your demand for 22%, what we occupied in 1967, is a maximalist position. And you're unreasonable maximalists to demand a Palestinian state in the West Bank and Gaza along the pre-67 lines with East Jerusalem as a capital. And so therefore we are going to, we hold all the power, you have none, you have zero leverage, and in any such negotiation, we are going to whittle you down to come to a more reasonable position reflecting the fact that you have no power and we're the ones who have the actual asset to give up, and you have no means of actually getting it. And so I think that there's a lot of back and forth about specific details of this Israeli-Palestinian negotiation and that one, but the core issue is that it's that the Israelis feel that giving Palestinians a state on 22% of the land is a maximalist position, and for the Palestinians, it's the very bare minimum.
Thank you very much for coming to speak to us tonight. I have a question. I've been following your journalism for many years, and it's not with this book that for the first time you've questioned the moral, ethical, legal basis of the entire Israeli governing system for the occupied Palestinian territories. However, do you find since the events of October last year that American publishers of periodicals, newspapers, other media, etc., have changed their attitude or acceptance or even seeking out your work than they did previously?
I can't speak to my own particular case because I've been really just doing events around this book, and I've been consumed with this book since October 7th, and I really have written almost nothing. But my sense is that, yes, there is a greater openness in general among mainstream American journals, magazines, newspapers, to views that are sympathetic to Palestinians, and that's a real marked shift. I think that I can say that with confidence. Yeah. Yeah, no, I heard you. I'll repeat what you were, oh, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was just wondering if it had become more closed as opposed to open, because a lot of the sort of right-wing journalism in the United States seems to be so strongly in support of Israel and what's happening.
Yeah, I mean, obviously the press is polarized and siloed, and I'm not really talking about the right-wing press. But no, I think that, you know, even if you just look, there's a lot still to criticize today about the coverage in the New York Times, for example. But what they publish today, you know, it's really impossible to imagine some of those pieces being published 10 years ago. And so I think in the mainstream there really is a pronounced shift.
Hola, jo voldria anar una mica a una situació actual. No? Actualment la població israelita, la gent d'esquerres o de dreta, entén el que està passant, o sigui, té informació de el que està passant realment a Gaza? Pregunto, no sé, sembla que a nosaltres sí que ens arriba aquesta informació. Amb ells els arriba també? I què penseu que en general pensa la gent?
So it's hard to generalize because there really is great division inside of Israel. You know, the ultra-Orthodox Jewish community is very insular and not so in communication with other parts of society. The national religious groups are separate. The secular centrists, center-left, are also a separate group. And of course, Palestinian citizens are another group. But if I were to make a generalization about, let's say, the Israeli center and the kind of more or less secular Israeli center, I would say that, you know, of course, they're not seeing the same images that you might see on international news networks. The Israeli television is not showing the horrific images that we see in Gaza, but those are easy for Israelis to access if they want to. I think the main sentiment is they have what's coming to them, that this is an entirely justified war, and that either the right amount of force has been used or more force needs to be used. And there is a great deal, there's very little sympathy for Palestinians in Gaza who are dehumanized really across the Israeli political spectrum. What there are protests for the release of the hostages, a demand for a new government in Israel, but those are not protests for ending the war in order to stop the shedding of Palestinian blood in Gaza. That is a tiny, tiny and really irrelevant movement.
Hola, bona tarda. Jo voldria saber fins quin punt el tema de la seguretat de l'Estat d'Israel podria explicar en part aquest escenari que expliques en el llibre en quant a els entorns militaritzats, de control, etc. I fins quin punt la seguretat podria ser l'incentiu que comentava abans el company per avançar o d'alguna manera garantir algun moviment amb aquest tema. Gràcies.
So if I understood the question correctly, it was about to what degree could you describe Israeli behavior in the West Bank in particular, but in general, to be driven by security concerns. It's funny, I actually just gave a tour in the West Bank to an American journalist who was visiting, and this was very much on his mind, and he kept asking, well, can't this be explained by Israel's security concerns? And the example that I gave him was in Hebron. So in Hebron, you have Jewish settlers, a very small group of Jewish settlers, roughly 800 Jewish settlers in a city of hundreds of thousands of Palestinians, and they're in the very heart of the downtown of Hebron. They've taken over Palestinian homes in this area, and in the name of security, Israel has created a sterile road. This is the word that they use, sterile, meaning free of Palestinians, clean of Palestinians, for only Jews and tourists to walk on in the center of Hebron. And along this road, Palestinian homes are welded shut. The front doors are welded shut. The families are climbing up ladders over the back and through the roof in order to enter their homes. And this is all done in the name of security. And of course, if you decide to put, to have a small group of settlers come and take over a downtown area of a Palestinian city, and they're also very violent, these particular settlers, toward their Palestinian neighbors, and they're attacking them and throwing trash at them. But then yes, of course, they require a sterile road, and they require these extreme measures to keep those people safe. And in Ramallah, you don't have settlers in downtown Ramallah, and therefore you don't have sterile roads. There's no sterile road in Ramallah. There's no road for only Jews and tourists to walk on in Ramallah. And I think that helps explain what is driven by security and what's not. I mean, the initial decision to plant these Jewish settlers in a place where they're deeply unsafe, and then to use security measures around them, and often these security measures are then utilized by the settlers to expand their control. So, and to give you a more historical answer, from 1948 to 1966, what is often referred to as the golden age of Israeli democracy, the period of time that the world's favorite Israeli liberal novelists revere. During that time, the majority of Palestinian citizens of Israel were living under a military government. They had a permit system. They had curfews. There was land that they could not access that Jews could access. And if you look through the archives, you see that Israel did not believe that these Palestinian citizens presented any security threat whatsoever. Yet they were under a security regime, under a separate military government. And the reason that military government was in place was to take over their land and the land of the refugees, and to keep a boot on their neck while the land was taken over. So I think that there are many actions that can be explained by security, and there are many actions that cannot.
Hello, Nathan. Thanks for your work. I wanted to ask you about the perception of people not living in Western countries. So it's been much talked about how the European Union, specifically, like the difference between how it responded to the war, to the invasion of Ukraine by Russia, and what Israel is doing in Gaza. So I wanted to ask you how you've traveled around and been in contact with different people. How do people that are living in non-Western countries perceive the European Union? And is there have you noticed things changing dramatically since October 7?
And sorry, just to clarify, do you mean the perception of Palestinians toward the European Union?
Well, I'm actually more interested in that. Yes.
Yeah. I think that I think Palestinians do make distinctions between different EU member states. I think that Palestinians are very aware that Spain has recognized the state of Palestine, that Ireland has recognized the state of Palestine. When there are Irish politicians who will make pro-Palestine speeches, those can often go viral among Palestinians and shared very widely. But overall, I think that the view is that the EU does whatever the US wants on this issue. That the US leads, the US dictates, and the EU defers. And that they're not, and therefore, because they're deferring to the United States, they're taking a very pro-Israel position in general.
Em sap molt de greu perquè crec que encara hi ha preguntes, però es veu que se'ns ha acabat el temps. I ara el Nathan tindrà l'amabilitat de firmar-vos llibres pels que vulgueu aquí fora. Doncs moltes gràcies, Nathan, i moltes gràcies a
Thank you very much. Thank you for coming. Thank you.